more than 30 million Americans have some kind of hearing loss. And with the crisis of coronavirus, everyone needed to have concise information and updates. Well, fortunately for Los Angeles, there's a wonderful team of ASL interpreters. And I'm delighted to have with us today Rick Pope, the coordinator for Los Angeles in the ASL team. So how does ASL work? How is the information getting across?
Well, obviously it's a visual gestural language, so the best way that I can describe it, one of my mentors, Betty Colonimus, actually came up with what they call the Colonimus model. And essentially what that is you take the source language, what in this case English, and you actually try to get a picture in your head first before you even raise your hands, because it's that picture that you're going to describe or paint with your hands, essentially. Your hands, your face, your body. So that's how the actual process of interpretation works. In terms of the linguistic roots, it actually came from the French Sign Language. In the 1800s, a gentleman named Gallaudet took a boat ride back over to the States with another gentleman named Leclerc, who taught Gallaudet the French Sign Language.
Okay.
Gallaudet came to the U.S. shores and established the first school for the deaf in Connecticut, the American School for the Deaf. And eventually, Gallaudet University, the only university specifically for deaf people located in Washington, D.C., was named for him. But that French Sign Language, then combined with Native American Plains Indian Sign Language, formed the basis of American Sign Language.
There was no, I mean, how do you express global pandemic? I mean, there were things that you had to create the language within the language in order to express the information.
Well, one of the things that we're taught is to interpret for meaning.
Okay.
There is no necessarily a verbatim interpretation word for word. It's really more concept for concept. So a pandemic would be interpreted something like a disease that has spread around the world.
Okay.
Coronavirus, we didn't have a sign, but the deaf community has always, the language has always adapted to the reality just like any other language, and we came up, or the deaf community came up with coronavirus, which if you take a look at the molecular photographs that they have, that you have the nucleus of that virus and then those little spiked proteins surrounding it. So you figure out what that picture looks like and what it's going to look like in context, and it spread pretty quickly.
So let's talk about your profession, your community, and the impact it has. Having worked with this entire realm for as long as you have, what do you know firsthand? How does this help people who have hearing loss and rely on this? What is the benefit to them, and why is it so critical, and why should we be sensitive to it?
So social distancing is a real issue in the deaf community. Therefore, that information, by all means, has got to get out to the deaf community, that just following cultural norms could endanger you.
What about masks? Is that going to impact people's ability to communicate? Because, as you said, it's not just the hand gestures, it's facial gestures. You know, there's so much that goes into, which is why it's fascinating to watch an ASL interpreter, because of the emotion and the humanity of what it is that they're doing. How are the masks going to impact?
I would really like to emphasize what you just said, that it is the work of humanity is really what it is. How the masks will impact, clearly with most of the language actually being on the face, it's almost like a text. You get a text and you're not quite sure what the intent is behind it. If somebody's being sarcastic, if they're angry, if they're happy, sometimes you get that text. You're not sure what the context is. And I think that's going to happen a lot with the masks, and people are going to need to understand that this is the field of human interaction. It is never wrapped up nice and pretty with a bow. And this is going to further complicate it. That people who have different communication styles and needs, different languages, and we're going to have to figure this one out. So in order to make things as accessible as possible and to serve humanity in the best way that we can, we need to have a comprehensive approach to how we provide that communication access, interpreting, captioning, how we communicate electronically, say to people who are blind. That's the entire suite, and that's what I would say to emergency managers. To the public at large, I would say absolutely pay attention to the things that you need, like batteries.
Oh.
Batteries for hearing aids.
Right.
Batteries for wheelchairs. They're the most desired pieces of equipment that are asked for. So it really is all about building your toolkit, making sure you have the food and the water and the medications and the equipment and the durable medical equipment if you need it, your prescriptions, and build that out for the week or 2 weeks that emergency management is suggesting that you do that. You have to have your own kit, but you have to personalize it, because what you will have in your kit won't be the same that I have in mine, won't be the same as, you know, Joe has in his or Jane has in hers.
You began interpreting very young. How old were you?
For every child who has a deaf parent, I think that might be a difficult question, because it's really something of a way of life.
Always was.
You know, this is before we had various laws in play. This is before we had telephone relay services. This is before video relay. I can remember at one time I had to interpret for my dad and the mechanic, and I must have been 7, 8, and it didn't go down very well, because the mechanic heard this young boy's voice saying something like, "Oh, it might be the carburetor." And the mechanic says, "Well, for a kid, you seem to know a lot about cars." And like a dutiful interpreter and child, I interpreted that to my father, who immediately took offense that he was being called a child.
Oh, no.
So we got in the car, and he was steaming. I told my dad, and he wouldn't listen to me. Got down to the mechanic, and he's like, "Do I look like a child?" That was probably one of the most impactful.
I was going to say, that's a memory that won't leave you.
It won't, and,
No.
it shows you quite often why using kids as interpreters in emergency situations may not be the best.
Oh, interesting point. I hadn't thought about that, because frankly, I was going to say there is also a trend now of teaching infants sign in order to allow them to communicate before they have the verbal prowess.
Yes, I've done that with my own child, and let me tell you, it really cuts down on the temper tantrums.
This is incredibly fascinating, and as much as I know that this, you said that it's kind of an awkward scenario or difficult or not the ideal, that there's a focus here. The information that you're sharing is really inspiring, you know, making people want to be more interested. So I think all in all, as terrible as all this has been and as difficult as it's been for you and your colleagues, this might have generated something very positive.
I'm hoping so. Again, if you take a look at across Google and the attention that's been paid to sign language interpreters across the country, it has absolutely become a watershed moment for interpreting. It has shed the light on interpreting and the work that we do. It has shed light on the fact that there are deaf people that use sign language in our communities, whether or not we see them.
Right.
There is still work to do in terms of getting the message across to communities that perhaps are deaf but don't use American Sign Language. There's work to do in terms of getting certified and deaf interpreters, people who are actually deaf themselves, in front of the camera to deliver that message as rapidly and concisely as possible. There's work to do in figuring all of this out in a socially distanced environment, and quite often an environment that is thrown together at the last minute. So we've got work to do, but absolutely the light that's been shed on the profession is unlike anything I've seen my entire life.
And that's a wrap on LA Currents.